Okay, you guys, I don't want to spend too much time on this because, as we all know, in today's fast moving world, as ChatGPT usually says, we don't have a lot of attention and we need to get right into the meat and the potatoes. I'll be sharing some of my favorite uses of AI. I have designed this to give you something very specific because obviously AI is a pretty big subject. So I'm not going to be able to share with you everything that I'm currently using AI for or anything that I have in terms of advice because then we'd probably be spending a couple of hours here and I don't want to take too much of your Wednesday. What are we talking about today? Frankly, this slide is a first ever for me because I've never put up a best before date on a presentation ever, like in the history of ever. But I think that that bears repeating because I feel that as different platforms come up, as ChatGPT and Claude and any other AI tool that you might be using at the moment, as they develop, as they progress, some of these prompts and examples may go away and we may start favoring something else. So I feel that you'll be all good with these ones all throughout the end of Q1, let's say. But my point having that in here is keep in mind that this may become outdated at a certain point, and I really urge you to keep track of the best in class, of the best examples, because they're going to be important for you to review and to double check. I know most of you who've signed up for this already know me. For everyone else, frankly, I'm not gonna waste your time with telling you all about my accolades and my experience and so on and so forth. You can just go to my website, vochanova.me, and see more of my work. What you need to know is that on a daily basis, I try to make words work. I'm working in content marketing and brand messaging, and the reason I'm so bullish on AI nowadays is that it has become my best writing companion, and I think it can become yours too. So if you want to know more, go there or ask me in the follow up or drop me a DM anywhere. LinkedIn is preferred, obviously, as you see here. The one thing I want to start with is to think about AI as a very fancy probability calculator, meaning that when you're using AI, what you're really doing is you're giving it some input, and then the output that it produces has been designed in a way that basically takes up all the information you've given it, and then it tries to guess what are the most common concepts and related semantic groups that it needs to put in front of you based on the input that you have set up. So, what this means is that when you use a very simple, a very naive prompt like something like that, write a 300-word opinion post about the role of content marketing for B2B SaaS, you're giving the AI very little information to work with. So it makes sense that what's going to come out of a prompt like that is a piece that's very basic, that's very simple. When I put that into ChatGPT yesterday, it gave me this amazing masterpiece of about 300 words, which included all of our favorite cliches. In a world where buying decisions are increasingly self-driven, I'm frankly surprised that it didn't say in today's fast-moving world or anything like that. Great content marketing is more than blog posts or white papers. It's about understanding your audience's needs. Consistency is key. These are things everyone says when they talk about content marketing. And if you're giving ChatGPT or your favorite AI tool of choice this little information to work with, you shouldn't be surprised that the output it's going to give you is going to be as cliched as hell. Because, back to my previous point, AI is really a probability calculator. It gives you the most common phrases and words and sentences that come after semantic groups like content marketing and B2B SaaS and opinion and post, which it probably thinks about the blog post. This is why it's writing in that format and so on. What we need to do is really to get the most out of AI, we need to work with it in a more mindful way, in a way that makes more sense for the AI, because then it's going to be really helpful and it's going to give us more information. This is generally the reason why a lot of expert content marketers and content marketing opinion leaders out there, like Amanda Natividad, say that AI is really just a fancy way of seeing what's already out there on a given topic and finding what not to focus on. And I have to say, I agree with her on that point, because this is, as always, as we see these short social media posts, this is a very simplified statement, but it speaks to that type of naive inputs into ChatGPT. And really, we can't be mad at the tool that it's not giving us something amazing, it's not giving us high literature, just because we haven't done our part of the work and we haven't given it enough to work with. There has to be a better way, right? As famous infomercials all over the world say. And I feel that to get better at creating content with AI, there are 3 specific areas we can focus on. And these areas include, first off, the knowledge, making sure that the AI has enough knowledge about the topic and making sure that we are familiar with the knowledge that your AI tool of choice possesses. Then we need to focus on style, making sure that whatever comes out of the AI is as close as possible to our natural writing style, be it ourselves as individuals or our brands if we're creating content for a company or business. And then finally, finding the ways to actually scale this, both in terms of scaling it for yourself as an individual content creator or an individual content marketer working for a company and being a content marketing team of one, but also scaling it in terms of scaling the knowledge throughout the organization, so that if you have a team who's working on content marketing, you can then give them these tools and tell them, okay, like this is the way in which we can ensure that whatever we create with the help of AI tools, it's going to be consistent and it's going to be on brand. I'm going to first start with knowledge. And when I'm talking about knowledge here, you can think about it in terms of the quality of the information that your AI tool possesses and is currently accessing when you're giving it a specific task. So getting back to that original point, AI being that probability calculator, there are really 2 ways in which we can ensure that AI is gonna use a lot of different bits and pieces of information when it's performing tasks for us. One would be to write a super lengthy prompt where you explain to it everything there is to know about the topic. Or the other way would be what we'll discuss in a second here, which is to prime the AI by asking it questions about the specific area of expertise that you want it to access. I want to open this up here. I have to say that most of the prompts that I'm currently using, they have been inspired, or some of them have even been copied from the work of others, and I'm giving credit where credit's due. So on every slide where I'm using prompts that have been generated by someone else or that have inspired a prompt that I've slightly tweaked for my work, I have linked there the original article where I found information about that. I'm starting here with priming, which is probably the thing that now has become sort of like a habit of mine whenever I start a new conversation with AI, especially when I'm creating something that's high stakes. Priming essentially means making sure that when you're talking with your AI partner, that it's going to access more information about the topic than what's in your individual prompt. So you can write a prompt explaining this is our target audience, this is our writing style, this is the topic that we're covering. Maybe you can even give it a short outline or whatever. But in any case, you don't have all day to write prompts. So there's an easier way of going about it, which is this idea of priming, or what you might even hear being called warming up the AI for a specific task. How do we do that? And I'll give you an example in a second. I want to take you first through the thinking process behind this. You first want to give it a role. Draft for it a very short explanation of who or what it needs to act like so that it knows where to source information from. So if you tell it you're a world-renowned copywriter and you're familiar with the work of David Ogilvy and Eddie Schneider and Brian Schwartz or whatever, it will know what you're trying to do, and it will access information it has on how copywriters perform these individual tasks. If you're writing about something different, for example, I had a project recently where I was working with a venture building company and we were creating this really massive resource on the best practices of venture building. So I told my AI partner, hey, you are an experienced venture builder. You're familiar with these and these venture building frameworks. I want you to tell me more about the best practices of venture building. So it already knew where I'm coming from, what it should sort of think about. Like I can anthropomorphize the AI a little bit here, what it will think about when it starts talking to you about this particular topic. This is one of the rare situations where jargon is something that you want to use. Because when you use specific terms that are only used within a particular industry or within a particular professional group, this is a very strong signal for the AI what information to look for, because it can do semantic analysis of these jargon words and it can then say, oh, like when she's talking about, prototyping and venture building and risk assessment and risk radar analysis, these are ideas and concepts that are very close to these other areas like growth marketing, startup building, prototyping, so on and so forth. And then the final thing that you want to do is, when you've given it this idea of who it needs to act like and what it should be familiar with in general, you can ask it for the key elements that are important for this category or for this industry or for this particular topic. You can ask it about best practices, common mistakes, and so on. So essentially, when I'm starting to work with AI, I do something like this to warm up my algorithm. And I'm giving you here an example from my fun with AI type of work. I'll give you more examples that are specifically related to content marketing later on, but I thought that it would be fun to just start off with something funnier. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm currently using AI to help me pairing wines when I'm cooking something at home or when we're meeting up with friends and we need to bring the wine. I have some idea about pairing wine with food. I'm not necessarily a great expert. So what I'm using AI to do is to tell me what it thinks would be a good pairing for a particular type of dish. And in that way, I can learn more and improve my understanding and my knowledge, because it also tells me why that's a good pairing. The way I created this sort of AI sommelier that's helping me currently is, I told it, you're an experienced sommelier who has successfully completed a WSET diploma and has been training in scale restaurants, specifically focused on wine and food pairing. You are experienced both in popular varietals and regions as well as the wines of more obscure countries. What you see here is that I have given it a specific role. I have told it you're a sommelier, you've been training in upscale restaurants. So basically what this gives it is, okay, sommelier, it's a very specific word that's used within a very specific industry. within a very specific context, right? So it will access information that's coming from this specific industry and this specific context. Then I've used the phrase you said diploma. This is the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, which is the best known educational platform for wine experts in the world. But it's something very specific again. So when I'm telling it WSET diploma, it knows that we're talking about wine, that we're talking about expertise in that particular category, and so on and so forth. This is what I was telling you about. Jargon is your friend here because it tells it you need to access more information that's semantically related to these words and phrases that I'm using. So that's very much on purpose that I've used this here. And then what I would do is I'd ask it a series of questions. What are the key strategies and best practices to keep in mind when doing a wine and food pairing? What are some lesser known tips that only experts know? What are mistakes that even experienced sommelier can make? So this information, let me give you a quick example here. This is what it looks like. So I've told it all that. It's given me a list of expert tips, of common mistakes that are happening, like of best practices and so on. I'm currently not going to be using any of this information in any particular piece of content. But what this does is that it provides a lot of additional information to the AI so that once I arrive at actually asking it to do something for me, it's not just taking into account my current prompt, but it's taking into account all the information within that single conversation that we've had. So when I ask it a very simple, a pretty naive prompt, your chef has provided a dish featuring oven prepared fresh bonito fish, and you need to pair it with a rosé. What varieties of rosé would you choose? It's not just taking into account this, but it's taking into account everything we discussed about good practices for wine pairing. So it's using this to access more very specialized information to give me the insights. Okay. So this is the real benefit of priming, is that it's a very quick way to get AI talking and to get it thinking within a specific category. And then what you can do is you can add more to that conversation. So you're not just passively just asking questions and taking whatever the AI says is a good thing, but you're going to give it some more information. One big limitation of AI is that whatever model you're currently using, it's going to be lagging a little bit behind. So still, most AI models aren't really, unless you specifically tell them to access information that's available on the internet right now, they're taking into account information that's been in there from like ages bygone of the internet era all the way to maybe 2022 or 2023 or whatever. You want to also give it more information, but also focus its attention on current trends. Because if I'm talking to AI about current SEO best practices and it starts giving me suggestions, it's going to be taking into account everything that it knows about SEO. And this is going to be information spanning from the because it has been trained on the body of work on the internet. And there are blog posts still available on the internet that are telling you what's the best way to rank on the #1 page of Google in 1998, right? So what we need to do is give it more up-to-date information, or even tell it, when you're listing best practices here, make sure that you list as the trends from the last 3 or 5 years from the data that you have available or something like that. But you can even teach it by giving it additional resources. And what you can also do is add additional context. Claude currently does that in a great way, because when you open a new project with Claude, you can add additional resources that the AI is going to take into account every time you perform an individual task with the AI within that specific project. So you can create one project for a particular client or for your brand, and you can add in it your audience personas, your product specifications, writing guidelines, whatever it is, to give it quickly, to give it additional information. An example of that, I was recently working on creating a ChatGPT that can help me write better content for LinkedIn quicker. And what I did was I first primed it in the same way that I prime my sommelier ChatGPT. And what I ended up doing in the end is I gave it additional resources to improve its understanding. Here's what that looks like. Here's my LinkedIn chat, and I'm going to be referencing that throughout our conversation. Like, I was asking it all of these individual questions that you already saw. I asked it what are some common copywriting mistakes that even experienced LinkedIn content writers may be making, and so on. But there was some stuff that I know is best practice that was sort of missing. So what I ended up doing is I fed it the transcripts of a couple of interviews from great experts and content creators who are very proficient in LinkedIn writing. So what we have here is we have like an interview with Justin Welsh, an interview with Caitlin Burgoyne, an interview with Neil O'Grady, or an interview on the current trends of the LinkedIn algorithm with Richard Vanderbloom. And I gave it a lot of these individual things. What this means is that the AI had to review this information, synthesize it, and as we continued our conversation, this information was already part of the knowledge base that the AI was accessing when I asked it then to create the next LinkedIn post. One important thing that I want to make sure that I mention here is try, whenever giving AI additional resources, every time you give AI additional resources, ask it if it can access them and ask it to perform a specific like summarization tasks or something like that. You can then verify that it has really taken into account all the information that you've given it. One particular thing here that's interesting is that I gave it some resources already as documents that I uploaded, but then I also gave it some links. This post here, Justin Welsh's content metrics introduction. I asked the AI to summarize all the resources that I gave it. Let me know if you can't access some of the resources, I said, and it didn't mention anything. But I also asked it, for the ones that you can access, create a short recap of key lessons related to copywriting for maximum visibility and audience engagement on LinkedIn, which was the task that we were currently tackling together. And what it gave me back is a summary of what it learned from Caitlin Burgoyne's interview, Richard Vanderbloom. You see here Neil O'Grady. You see here Neil's cheat sheet on writing formulas, avoiding common mistakes. Something that I saw here is that it never mentioned Justin Welsh. And what I then asked specifically and very pointedly was, did you manage to access the hooks library and Justin Welsh's content matrix? Because these were two additional resources that I gave it here as links, but it never mentioned anything from them. And I've already read these resources and I know what I'm doing. So this is also a reminder, like, don't ask ChatGPT something without having any form of ability to actually review its work. Like, you need to still be a pretty decent and diligent expert when you're reviewing information here. So it then said, no, I wasn't able to access them. And it didn't even say that it didn't manage that. And this is a very particular problem that we still have with AI, which is you're gonna hear the word hallucination quite often. But the thing is that when you ask it to do something, turning back to my original point, AI is a probability calculator. It's gonna try to the best of its ability, calculate what you're asking it to do and what you're trying to get from it. So you need to be able to verify if the AI has actually understood what you're telling it to do. I gave it some additional information and then it managed to incorporate Justin Welch's 8 content formulas for writing on LinkedIn in our subsequent work together on LinkedIn posts. Getting back to what we're talking about, the final thing that you'd want the AI to do is to make sure that together you start diving deeper. And the way you can do that is pretty neat. And again, this is one of those standing on the shoulders of giant moments. This I learned from Chris Penn. And he does this really cool thing where once it has asked the AI about all the different best practices and mistakes, when you have given it any additional information and context that you wanted to incorporate, when you've corrected it a few times on what you wanted to do and so on, you ask it to create a summary. So it goes something like this: build on everything we've talked about and then create a high-level outline of the best practices for copywriting on LinkedIn. In this case, this is just an example, incorporating everything we've discussed so far. This is a very neat way to create your own set of best practices and create a prompt, which we'll be talking about later on, that you can then replicate when you start creating more and more content on scale. And once you ask it to do that, you can go even a step deeper and ask it for details. So when it creates this high-level outline, you can ask it to write an even more detailed outline about each section that it has already outlined. So here's what that looks like. Here's the high-level outline for copywriting on LinkedIn, what we were just talking about up till now. It talks about understanding your audience, leveraging attention, utilizing content formulas, yada, yada, yada. I'm not gonna go through the whole thing. What I saw in here was that it was talking a lot about different additional elements to creating LinkedIn content, and it wasn't only focusing on the writing part, which was important for me in this particular case. So again, I corrected it, I nudged it in the right direction, and yet I told it I want you to rewrite this to focus on writing only without considerations like content formats, visuals, publishing frequency, and so on, so that it can really give me a high-level outline about practices for writing specifically. And this is what it gave me: understanding the voice, starting with the compelling hooks, creating content for maximum impact, so on and so forth. And then I asked it to create a detailed outline for each individual section. And then what it gave me back is for each individual section. So for example, here we have section 1, understanding and defining your brand voice. It gives me a list of what to do in this particular case. When we were talking about creating strong and compelling hooks, it gave me an idea of like why hooks are important, what type of hooks to use with a definition, an example, and so on and so forth. I'm going through this pretty quickly, I know that, but that's why you also get the recording. I want to cram as much information here possible, and really it's about you understanding what you can do with it, because you're probably going to use that for something else entirely, not necessarily LinkedIn. This is again one of those moments where you want it to talk to you a lot about the particular category that you're currently exploring with AI, just because the more the AI talks, the better it understands what you want it to do further down the line. So you're essentially using your time in the best way possible. You can get it to talk to you and then you can only verify, as opposed to writing these super long, extensive prompts that are going to take you ages to create. And this is a much more efficient way of doing that. And then you can ask it for rewrites. I showed you already this example. When you're not happy with how it writes something or what type of information it focuses on, you can ask it to rewrite it and focus on something else. You can tell it specifically what you want it to include in there. also tell it if you wanted to include something specific that it has already referenced. In my case, this was the copywriting frameworks and hook formulas from New Gradient just in Welsh. As you can see, this is a very useful thing to do when you're trying to understand or to make sure that the AI understands best practices, but it can be used in other situations. And one thing that I was doing as an earlier AI user that I now recognize as one of the biggest mistakes was to every time start a new conversation with the AI. What I'm currently doing is I have individual chats about individual topics and I reuse them because I now understand that the AI is using all of our previous conversation to generate the output. And currently, with the introduction of the latest ChatGPT models, we are seeing that they're working very hard to make sure that even if you are conducting a new discussion with the AI, it actually takes into account everything you've discussed in previous chats, which at one point will probably be very useful. But for now, the best way of going about it is to get the AI talking to you, add additional information to it, and then continue using that same chat to get a better output. The second use case where this approach is helpful is when you're trying to find information about a specific topic. If you're working as a freelancer like myself, I often come into a new project in an industry that I have virtually no or very little experience with. And one of the things that I would do is I'd try to prime and to prod a new chat conversation to give me succinct information about that particular category. And my point isn't, rely on AI for all your research because it still does hallucinate. It still will provide the most common scenarios, not the ones that you really want to focus on. But it is a good way to get a good basic summary about a new category. And the third thing, and this is what Amanda Natividad was sharing on LinkedIn, the screenshot I showed at the start of this discussion, is that it's sometimes really good to have a clear understanding of what's common knowledge. And all of the output of the AI is going to be more or less common knowledge. So you can then see, okay, like if AI knows all of this, can I create content that sort of fills in the gaps that's adding more to the conversation on top of what the AI already knows? Because if the AI knows it, then it's more or less a good bet to say probably a more advanced, experienced audience in my particular area or industry or category would know that information as well. So by now you have the AI do a lot of the heavy lifting in order to do two particular things. First of all, you can use this approach to synthesize knowledge about the best ways of creating content in your specific categories or in your specific channels and formats, because I'm very active on LinkedIn, but maybe you want to ask it about the best practices of writing a YouTube script or of creating a short TikTok video or whatever. You can use that same approach for that. And on the other hand, you can get the AI talking and synthesizing a lot of information about the actual topics of your content. The example I gave you with the venture building resource we were recently working on. So you can get a clear understanding of what's already out there, and you can then start summarizing and outlining a particular piece of content based on what's common knowledge, what needs to be addressed for sure because it's best practice, but also what's not in there and what you need to include based on your own as a personal expert or your company's understanding about that particular industry. And it's easy to get the AI to tell you more beyond the basics and beyond the common things. So here are a few prompts that you can use to start creating content that's a little bit more out there. And these are all coming from Andy Crestodina, whom I mentioned earlier as well. So asking it to point you to specific mundane topics about your industry that experts care about. This is a great way to brainstorm new ideas for content on social media, for example. What are some of the myths within your industry? AI can help you find that. What are some common assertions that are not usually supported by evidence? So stuff that we say like, having a green button on the page improves click-through rates by 10% or whatever. Do we really know that, or is this something that everyone says because everyone else says it as well? Like, these are just some examples. And you see a couple of other ones here about finding counter narrative or less common directions for creating content within your industry that you might find useful. So please, don't just use a naive prompt like, give me 10 ideas about new LinkedIn posts that will be interesting to people in the knitting industry. Like ask something that's a lot more specific and you'll get a lot cooler ideas for content that you can create. I think the second and very important topic is how do we ensure that the actual writing happens in a style that feels like us? And this is, for me, one of the biggest unlocks for using AI to actually write content for you, because everything we've been talking about so far, it's about the knowledge, it's about the content ideas themselves and the topics you're going to cover and so on, but we haven't really spoken about actually writing in a style that's personal and that feels authentic. So I'm going to give you my approach to creating a style guide rather for AI to use when it's actually writing content for you. And it's frankly easier than you might think, but you have to do some prep work at the start. You can again start with priming the AI by asking it about what are best practices for assessing and keeping a consistent author brand voice or a consistent business brand voice and so on and so forth, just to get that chat going, to warm it up. And what you'd want to do then is to analyze real life content that you already have out there. How are we going to do that? For one, you can ask AI if it can read your site directly. This is an easy way of going about it, but for a variety of obscure reasons, I'm still often experiencing problems with getting my AI tools to access different sites directly, even when I know that there isn't really a limitation that the website publisher has put on. What you can do is most content management systems nowadays have an easy way to export information. For example, if you're using a site that's based on WordPress, you can easily export individual blog posts or even full categories of blog posts from your site and feed those into AI, and it will be in a format that it can understand. What you'd want to do equivalently for social media content is to extract information from that. So, for example, if you're on a platform like LinkedIn, that isn't immediately apparent how you can do that, but you can use a tool like Taplio to create a free account and then wait for a couple of days. I think Taplio currently has a 14-day free trial, and you can, by day 5 or 6, they would have already crawled about a year's worth of content in your LinkedIn account, and you can export all of those individual posts and you can then feed them to AI. Or if you're creating an analysis of the writing style for your newsletter, You can usually export these individual newsletters from your newsletter platform as well. It depends on the platform. If you're having trouble with any of these, I didn't want to get too technical because I know that there are a lot of different scenarios here. But if you're not exactly sure on how to export information for your platform of choice, then just let me know and I'll try to help you out. When we have this information, we're gonna write a prompt that's pretty simple because we've already warmed up our chat. And we're gonna tell the AI, hey, based on the best practices that we've already been discussing about analyzing the writing style, try to analyze the style of these documents that I'm going to upload. And I will give you different types of content, and I want you for each individual type of content to tell me, your comprehensive analysis of the writing style. And then you can also ask it to create something pretty cool, a voice and tone table. I'm just going to show that to you in a second there. Having a voice and tone table is probably the easiest way to present your brand voice. If you're creating content for a company and you're onboarding new writers, or you have freelancers that you work with, or if different people within the team are creating content, this ensures that everyone is going to stick to that same brand voice. And later on, we're going to discuss how you can actually input that into all of your team members' chat GPTs or whatever other AI tools they are using to actually ensure that this gets followed when they're creating AI generated content as well. And then you're going to ask the AI to outline your main characteristics of your overall writing style, because ideally your brand is going to have a common brand voice, but there might be tone differences between the individual channels, and you're also going to ask it about that as well. Here's what that looks like. This is my writing style generator. So at the start, I've done what we've been already talking about for a long while. I've warmed up the AI. I've told it we're going to analyze the writing style of an author. That's me. I've also told it, like, if I reference me or I further on, this is who I mean. And I've asked it to tell me a bit more about the major components of writing style, and it has given me a lot of information. Then I asked it about common mistakes, everything we've been talking about earlier. What are some additional aspects that we might have missed, and so on and so forth. Then what I've done is I've fed it a few XML files that I've exported from my website through WordPress. And I've asked it to analyze my writing style based on the information within those. And sometimes, depending on the format of the file or even the size of the files, AI might hiccup for a second there and not be able to access the information. So here we're using that approach again. I'm gonna ask it and tell it, tell me if you're having trouble accessing or reviewing the information in any of the files I provide. It told me it's having a difficult time accessing the files. And I'm like, I have no idea how to fix that. I'm not, proficient in data management. I asked it to actually just try to use another parsing method. And it found a way to actually do that. That's why it's important to ask it, are you having trouble? Is everything okay? Say yes or no. And then if it runs into a problem, pretty often it's going to be able to solve that on its own, but you have to guide it through for a short while. So then it gave me sort of the writing style for my blog posts here. And then let me just go through the whole thing, because it's a pretty long discussion that we've had. I asked it to go into a deep level analysis for each individual category of my writing style that it initially found, just again to get it to access more information. And then I created this voice and tone table for my writing style. So you see here, it has listed all the individual voice attributes, and I asked it to use that format. This is a format that I used to use back in the olden days before AI to create a simple format that teams can use to create consistent writing in their own brand voice. And I've been using this ever since. So it's a very simple format. I'm asking it to create a table with the following columns: voice attribute, the attribute definition, do's and don'ts for each individual one. So for example, when it says it's my writing style is supportive, encouraging tone that recognizes reader challenges, use phrases that empathize with the struggles of the reader, don't sound too critical or judgmental. If you give that to an external writer, chances are that they would be pretty good at starting to use this. What you can do is you can actually export this, just copy and paste it into a Google Doc. And then if someone starts writing for you and for your company and they are using an AI writing assistant, they can literally just screenshot the table and then upload the screenshot in ChatGPT or another AI tool and tell it, this is the writing style. And you need to follow this writing style when you're writing for this client. And then it's going to follow that style and try to keep up with it, which is pretty cool. You don't need to upload just text documents. You can even upload the screenshot. And it's pretty good at recognizing writing, especially when it's something that hasn't been handwritten or anything like that. We go through the same process with newsletter content, and I've actually gone through the same process with LinkedIn content. And what I ended up doing in the end, just to give you an idea, and I'll go through some of the other details here as well. I ended up asking it, based on everything we've discussed so far, I want you to outline the main characteristics of my overall writing style and then the changes depending on the channel. It first gave me this, where it gives me first all the overall style characteristics, and then it gives me an individual one for the blog, the newsletter, and so on, which is sort of useful when I'm trying to create a prompt for writing specifically for the newsletter. But what I wanted it to do is actually compare and contrast each individual characteristic depending on the channel that I'm using. So I asked it to actually rewrite this, and underneath each main characteristics to also include different variants per channel. So we have, for example, audience-centric focus, meaning that my content is centered on the reader themselves or anything like that. And then we have how that transpires in the blog, in the newsletter, and in LinkedIn content. Once you've gone through all of that, another good way of making sure that the AI is keeping with your style when you're giving it a prompt to write, let's say, a new piece of content for you, a blog post or whatever, is to give it some of your signature content pieces. You can just copy and paste a few individual pieces of content into a document that you can then feed the AI and say, on top of keeping up with all these individual characteristics that we've just outlined here, I want you, when you're writing for, let's say, my newsletter, I want you to also write according to the style that you see in these individual signature pieces. This is basically what the prompt would look like. In this case, I was creating an individual chat for newsletter writing specifically. I gave it a short prompt that was based on the brand voice that we've already analyzed and outlined in that example I just showed you. And on top of that, I also shared with it the newsletter writing. So I told it, use my newsletter writing style, which I already uploaded, and reference the attached newsletter signature content to understand how the writing style should read. Each heading 1 in that document is the beginning of a different newsletter piece, and you need to keep with that style. Giving it signature content is a very cool way to put a great focus on the content that you feel is the best content that represents your writing style impeccably. And this is a very key element if you're working for a brand that has a lot of publishing history, so you don't want to upload maybe all of the blog posts, some of which were written in the 20s or 2005 or whatever, but you want to give it specific examples of current content that you feel represents your style in the best way possible. So here's my newsletter writing chat. I first gave it really everything that other chat mentioned about writing for newsletters. And I have this here, and you're going to see the same wording here, audience-centric focus, educational depth, storytelling, and so on and so forth. And then I also gave it just a Word document with maybe 10 of my latest newsletters that I felt were really interesting and really cool. And I wanted to reference them when writing in the future. And I also want to show you some of the examples of content it actually made based on these directions. And you see here, this is a pretty quick chat, pretty quick description from my end. This is something that I already had created with the help of AI in a previous conversation. I copy pasted a few individual newsletter editorial letters and I gave it an understanding. And then I already gave it an outline for a specific newsletter piece. And this is pretty much probably like 75% done when it came out of the AI. And you can see here that it has actually followed, if you're familiar with my newsletter, you'll quickly see that it has followed my structure. So I have a short story as an introduction. I have a couple of specific takeaways that I want people to get. And then I end with a PS that's posing a question to the reader. So it was pretty quick to grasp what I wanted it to do and to start writing in my own style. One important thing that I'll get back to in the end here is that I have actually given it an outline. So I didn't tell it, write whatever you think is going to be interesting to, a marketing person reading my blog. I actually gave it something that I had as an idea for a new piece, and it only helped me sort of lay out that first draft on the page. Obviously done a lot of editing on top of that to make it really sound like me, but this was a pretty good initial draft. It was frankly surprisingly good when I first started doing that. My final point here is, okay, like we have seen some neat tricks here. How are we scaling that? How do you make sure that you can continue using these hacks or whatever you want to call them as you go along? And even more importantly, how do you teach others within the team to start using this approach as well? A few really easy things to start doing. The first thing that I do, and it's very cool when you see it working in real life, is to ask it to create a scoring rubric for your brand voice or for the quality of your content or for the originality of your ideas, whatever is important to you. Ask it to create a scoring rubric. And if you're not familiar with that term, a scoring rubric is something that's used in academia quite a lot. And since AI originated in research facilities, it's very familiar with what a scoring rubric is. That's what you can directly ask it. Using the analysis of the LinkedIn writing style components, I fed you my LinkedIn posts, you've analyzed them, you've told me already what the best practices are. Now create a scoring rubric to assess how well a piece of content aligns with my writing style and how it aligns with best practices. So you can sort of combine the two. I've currently done this here in this example specifically for writing style, but you can also combine it with best practices for creating engaging content. And you can even end it here and it will already know what to do, but I usually add telling it to create a scoring rubric that uses variable integers to score each writing style component, and the total needs to be 100 points. So what this looks like is something like that. Here it is. So this is this exact prompt, the LinkedIn writing style, and the rubric for that. And here we go. Voice and tone equals 15 points. 15 being very, very closely related to the writing style that's already been exhibited in the pieces that I've already fed it. 0 being doesn't really fit the style at all. Audience-centric focus, if it's giving people a feeling that they can see themselves in the writing, then that's a 15, and so on and so forth. And you see here, it quickly understands that some things are more important than others. So voice and tone, the maximum is 15 points. Storytelling, the maximum is 10 points. Even if I sometimes don't include an individual story, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So it might be something that's not 100% there. So this is what that scoring rubric is going to look like. Copy and paste this into a Google Doc or a Word doc or whatever, and share that with your team. Because what you can then do is, when someone is writing new content, ask them to run through this sort of quick check with the help of AI to find ways to improve that writing. Using that scoring rubric, you feed the AI your new piece of content, you upload the scoring rubric as a doc file or a TXT file or whatever, and you ask it to score the text that has just been written, or even if the AI wrote it, ask it to grade its own work, and then return an analysis with the score for each individual section. And then, using that score and the analysis, you can ask the AI to create a refinement on the text that improves that score. Here's an example of that at work. So using this scoring rubric, I asked it to analyze and score the text. It returned the score. It mentioned where something was lacking. And then it gave me some examples of how to improve it. So for example, here in the storytelling, opening anecdote is relatable. A few more relatable phrases or anecdotes could enrich the style. So then it included these other storytelling moments in the content to improve that writing as well. So it can already show you where you're not 100% there and how you can improve. And you can do this with text that the AI has written, or you can do this with your interns or people who are just entering your team and you're trying to show them how to write in your team's brand style. You can ask them to do this exercise on their own, ask them to write a piece, write the first draft on their own, then upload it to the AI and use your team scoring rubric to find ways to improve the writing on their own before even sending it to an editor on the team. And then what you can also do is, from everything you've done so far, be it best practices for writing specific types of posts, be it your own writing guidelines, you can ask it to create a prompt for itself. Based on this analysis and the scoring rubric, create a prompt that can work as a style guide, which can be given to ChatGPT. So you're asking it to write something that it will itself learn from, so that the AI can effectively write future LinkedIn posts in my voice, tone, and style. And once you have that, you can give that prompt to everyone on the team. So it's not going to be that massive conversation that we already have, which is a rich data environment, but this is going to be just as good. So here I have an individual chat for newsletter writing, and I've only included here in the beginning the prompt that my other conversation generated for the writing style of the newsletter. So it's pretty quick and easy to do that, and it can massively improve your writing and your team's writing as well. Keep using the AI to improve your writing and to learn as you go along. So it's not just about, finishing the work in the least amount of time. It's about also learning and improving your own skills as a writer. One of the best places to start is the Rappel AI prompt framework that was created by Trust Insights. You can download it here. It's a great way to phrase your prompts in a rich way, in a way that's easy to understand by AI, and that's going to give you that rich environment that will create better outputs as you go along. And it's pretty quick to get used to, and it's massively improved the way I write or I converse with AI. But you can also, when you're writing even the most naive prompt, the one we started with, remember it? Like write a 300 opinion piece about the importance of content marketing in B2B SaaS. You can ask AI, you can give it that, but ask it to improve it and to critique it. So here's a prompt that you can use for that. You first give it a role. You remember, like, jargon is our friend here. You will give it your short, terrible prompt and you tell it, I know this prompt is terrible, so that it doesn't try to make you feel better and say, oh, no, it's actually a great prompt. And you ask it to analyze it and to give you improvement ideas based on peer-reviewed academic papers on prompt engineering. So you make sure that you ground it in academic work that's going to ensure that the output you get is much better and much higher quality. And then you finally ask it, okay, you've given me examples of how I can improve it. Now rewrite this for me using the prompt engineering best practices that you've discussed. So here's the original prompt. Write a 300-word opinion post about the role of content marketing for B2B SaaS. I'm not going to show you the results for that. I have to say it was amazing. It was miles better than anything I could have written by myself. So I leave this for sort of a quick test homework for you. Just copy and paste this when you get the slides, and you see how much better a simple naive prompt like that is going to get when you run it through a critique of AI prompt engineering expert like that. And the final note I want to end on is there's one thing that I definitely don't think you can outsource to AI, and that's your own thinking. Great ideas come from us as humans. So you have probably already felt this in the examples I gave you. I'm never using AI to generate my first level ideas. I give it an outline and it creates a first draft, or I ask it to brainstorm ideas with me, but I never tell it, give me 10 ideas about LinkedIn posts, and I never just, without any form of critique, just tell it, no, like, just go ahead and write one of those. And I really love this framework of like when you should use AI to generate content and when you should rely on your own human brain. And when it comes to more thorough, more in-depth information like thought leadership content, it's all about humans writing or at least ideating with the help of AI, but using very specific brand style directions. You can't really do thought leadership without doing the thinking. And I'm going to end with this amazing quote from the great Anne Handley, who's my all-time favorite content marketer. She says that writing without AI lets us wander around the wilderness, machete at hip, cutting through the thick undergrowth of unexplored territory. It's not about the output, it's the experience I had to get there and the insights I was surprised to trip over along the path, popping up like twisted roots. When you're doing the thinking, AI can then help with the writing, but it can never go the other way around. Final thing here on the slide side, and I'm jumping into the comments. If you go to this page on my website, volchanova.me/P2Perfect, which is prompt to perfect, the title of today's session, you find the slides from the session and you can just copy and paste all the prompts that I shared with you here. Let me know what you think about today's session. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys next time. I had a lovely time. I hope it was helpful to you. LinkedIn is my bread and butter, so go there. And on the page where you're gonna access the slides, there's also a way for you to subscribe to my newsletter. I routinely share information about AI creation there too. So just scroll down a bit and you'll see the link to subscribe to the newsletter. Put your information in there and you'll get the next one on Friday. So this is gonna be a helpful way to continue that relationship further. Thanks so much, everyone, and see you around.